Okay, I got an excellent question about use the Pythagorean identity skill here in Khan. And so we have an angle that's located in the third quadrant and whose sine is negative 12 over 13. So there's other ways to find the cosine of that angle, but they want us to use the Pythagorean identity. So here's my solution right here. First off, here is just the Pythagorean identity. And it's just the square of the sine plus the square of the cosine is equal to 1, okay? Now, what we know from our info in our problem is that the sine, I wrote it as x in my solution, but the sine of theta here is equal to negative 12 over 13. So I just substituted in for sine. Or I just wanted to show you that this little symbol, when you have a squared here, that really means the sine squared, okay? Kind of did that. But I just substituted in negative 12 over 13 for sine of theta, or x. And I'm squaring it now. Okay, when I do that, I get 144 over 169, okay? Now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to solve for cosine, because that's what we want to know, right? We don't really want to know x. We want to know cosine of x, or cosine of theta. So I'm going to subtract 144 over 169 from both sides. Okay, and then of course I'm going to get common denominator of 169, and that gives me 25 over 169 is equal to cosine squared of x. I'm almost there now, right? I've got cosine squared is equal to this. Now I just have to find out what cosine of x is equal to. Well, I'm just going to square root both sides, right? To get rid of this square right here. And now I have cosine x is equal to 5 over 13. That's really the square root of 5 and the square root of, this is square root of 25, which is 5. The square root of 169 is 13. Okay. Now, one thing you'll notice is that because we're using squared in the Pythagorean identity here, it always gets rid of the negative information on anything. So we really have to, we're always going to get a positive answer for whatever we're solving for, either sine x or cosine x. And then we have to adjust that, the sign of that for whatever quadrant we're in. Yeah, so I got cosine of x is equal to 5 over 13. But that's not the end of the story, because we have to adjust for the sign, adjust the sign of it. It's either going to be positive or negative, but we need to figure out what cosine is supposed to be in the third quadrant, right? And if you go around, cosine is always negative in the third quadrant, right? Because it's really because the x is always negative in the third quadrant. So cosine of x would be equal to negative 5 over 13. Don't assume that you're always going to turn the answer negative, right? It depends on the quadrant. Sometimes, like if it was the cosine, if they wanted to know if this was the fourth quadrant, for example, the cosine of x would stay positive, it would be 5 over 13. So it really depends on your quadrant. I hope that helps a little bit on this.